Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stephenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. And today we're going to be sitting down with our 2023 Tree Farmer of the Year, Mr. Charles Vickers, and the Vickers Family Tree Farm. We're going to be talking to him about his history, his property, and a little bit more of that here coming up. But first, before we get into that, I want to give a shout out and a special thank you to our sponsors this month, DDK Forestry and Real Estate. We appreciate their continued support of the show, and we're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in the episode. But for now, let me introduce my guest, Mr. Charles Vickers. He is one of the owners, if I'm not mistaken, of the Vickers Family Tree Farm here located in Mountain View, Arkansas. Mr. Vickers, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I know I say thank you for joining us, but we are sitting in your kitchen currently here on the property, so it's more like I have joined you guys this time around, but thank you for letting us into your home.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Vickers, I tell you what, let's kind of start off because I want to start off with getting your history a little bit. If you could tell us, how you came to be a tree farmer, but because you've done a lot of stuff in your life, so let's just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I grew up here in Stone County, actually just about a quarter of a mile from where we sit right now, and property was settled by my ancestors. They homesteaded this area, and I grew up here, was not born here. I was born just a few miles away, but we moved here in 1946. In a house that was built back in 1850, but it was a pretty modern house for that period of time. I lived there most of my life, or most of my teen and years going to school at Mountain View, except that we did live in Mountain View for some years when I was in high school. But anyway, graduated from high school here. Didn't really want to lay rocks for a living, so and that was about the only thing there was to do around here.
Well, there's plenty of rocks here, that's for sure.
Rock houses, right, built. So I joined the Navy, and fortunately they recognized my mechanical aptitude and put me in a position that I got a whole lot of training in the mechanical area and steam propulsion systems and all the machinery and equipment that goes with operating a 400-foot ship. And anyway, when I got out of the Navy, my goal was to go ahead with my education and become an engineer. Well, I did that for a while, but fortunately I ran into a fellow that said, well, given your advancement in the Navy, the training that you had, the company I work for will hire you in a New York minute and give you and pay for all the remaining education that you need to get your ASME certification and work card. I said, that sounds good. So very quickly, we're on our way to Dallas. And went to work for an engineering company there, kind of small at that point of time. It was owned and was started and owned by 4 ex-World War II veterans that used their GI Bill to get engineering degrees and started a consulting engineering firm. And they was kind of small when I went to work for them. It was less than 20 employees or something of that nature. But they did what they said. They got me prepared for all the examinations that I had to pass, to take and pass to get my certification, and got that. Working as a engineering trainee. Well, 40 years later, I was one of 3 that reported directly to the chief executive officer, but we were a whole lot larger, several hundred employees. The corporate office had moved to Chicago, So, rather than move to Chicago, I just about wore out American Airlines going back and forth to Chicago for staff meetings and all that stuff. Anyway, retired, and in 1999, my wife she was worked in administration for large school districts, virtually all time that, leading up to that time. And so she retired, we retired on the same day. So then we were free to, our first second home to get out of the Texas heat, we was in Maine, on the coast of Maine. We had a house up there for several years. We went back and forth to Maine, but that's just a long ways, and and invariably every time you got up there, something happened, that you needed to be somewhere else, and so after about 8 years of doing that, something like that, we decided that we would just build us a house here on this property since we owned it, and and that's what we did. I didn't build it all by myself, but I did a lot of it and hired local contractors to do the rest of it. All this property and property across the road, the whole 320 acres, or 16 is what it surveys out, I think. But everything in Arkansas is more or less. So
yeah,
you never know whether it's more or whether it's less.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we bought some heavy equipment, traco and dozer, and started cleaning it up. And what you see is is where we got.
So how long have you guys been growing timber on it?
Well, we started planting trees. My wife, Martha, grew up in Prairie County, North Prairie County, and she inherited 80 acres when her mother passed away. And, we lived in Dallas. We had a guy that was, her mother had a guy that was leasing the property, row cropping it. Well, he and his wife were involved in some kind of an accident, and he had to give up his lease on it. Well, then we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with it. Well, don't remember exactly how it worked out, but we got in touch with our Doug Jackson, who was a forester for Arkansas Forestry in Prairie County, and he agreed to help us with what we needed to do to get to plant trees on it. So he put us in touch with Robert Knight and Star City, who did all the was a contractor, just planting, taking care of trees after they were planted, fire lanes and things of that nature. Well, Doug got us I don't recall where it came from, but he got the financing to plant the trees with and prepare the property and all that. And we planted trees. It was probably, it was 2008 or something like that when we started building this house. So from 92 to 2008, we were kind of absentee landowners. But, worked out good. Robert did a good job for us. In fact, we moved up here and got in touch with, or got the house built and got in touch with Mike Mallory, who was a county forester here. And he did the same thing for planting these trees on the east side of Cove Road. And And so, we got that done. Then we started planting trees on the other side and, cleaning up but it all required a whole lot of, bulldoze, track hoe, pulling trees, burning, that took us several years.
Just to get it cleaned up and ready for, yeah.
Right. And we planted this over here in 2021, something like that. I'm sorry, 2001, 2002, somewhere right in there. So, those trees are a little over 20 years old. We thinned them for the first time last 2016.
So every tree farmer has kind of a plan for their property. Is that what you guys are doing? Are you using the land mainly to grow timber, or is it wildlife management, or what are your goals, I guess, for this property?
Well, it probably started out more to just grow timber, something that we could manage the 6-sprout trees growing up in the fields, and if you cut down a sweet gum 2 inches in diameter, it's not going to be long until you've got six trees, and it don't take them long to be 6 inches in diameter, so it can really get in a mess in a hurry. So we cleaned up all the old fields, planted them, and then we started on the road system, access system to get to where we wanted to go, get very close to any part of the property. But in the interim, had bought 300 acres on Cedar Mountain, just 3 or 4 miles over here. Bought 300 acres of old fields and went up the side of a mountain. And we thought we were going to plant trees on it. Well, the forester was over there one day, was doing some burning, and they came over to check our burning, what we were doing, and he said, "What are you going to do with this?" And I told him we was going to plant trees, and he said, "Well, you can't grow trees in this soil here." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with this soil?" So we dug around there a little, and he said, "It's just shale. Pine trees don't grow very well in shale." So I got a little more involved in it, had some soil samples pulled, and sure enough, so it went on the market. So that kind of sped up what we were doing over on this side. But, it's just, we've been working at it, consistently for, ever since we, since we built this house. But to answer your question, initially it was probably growing timber. And like I said, just as a matter of making the property a little more valuable than just old grown up fields. But I had been leasing that property over on Freeze Mountain to a hunting club out of Alexandria, Louisiana. And really good guys, family, mostly family, but they really, it wasn't like you found potato chip bags all over the place when you went out, Coke cans and and all that. They when I told them no trash, well, they listened to it. So when I got this over here ready to start letting them hunt over here, well, then they leased this, and I put them in. They brought their trailers up here. I put them electrical connections or water into where they could hook up, have all the hookups that they needed. they've been with me ever since. And so it has shifted considerably given a timber market, other than for white oak, into wildlife.
Okay.
I've often said that over time, I'll make 3 times as much in the wildlife business as I will in the timber business.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of, you mentioned talking about the soil being not super great for pine specifically. And that was something that I kind of thought of that I wanted to talk to you about, because usually when we're talking to tree farmers, we're talking South Arkansas tree farms, right. But we're pretty North Arkansas at this point, where we joke pretty rocky and hilly, mountainy. So what are some of the issues that you have found trying to get trees to grow in this type of environment?
Really none. They when we ripped this across the road over here, we turned up rocks 6 by 8, 2 feet thick, but when you plant, you just, and I haven't had any issues at all. Now there are some areas that, where that's so rocky that you just can't plant it, but those areas still grow good white oak. And at that point in time, we had a fairly decent stand of red oak on this property, and we lost all of it in 2011, 2012. I think I know where there's about 3 red oak trees on my property anymore. And at one time I had a stand all over it. Now it's white oak is the predominant tree, but depending on where you are, I've got a lot of walnut. I've got a lot of really nice walnut trees, but sweet gum grows like you fertilize it every 2 weeks.
Okay, so it's all about, I guess, what you're planting specifically in this type of soil, the type of tree. Because again, usually we're talking loblolly pine in Arkansas when we're talking about tree farms, but you've got a lot of diverse species, I guess, growing on your property.
Yes, we've got we planted loblolly, in the old fields. There is a significant amount of shortleaf pine, especially on the rocky hillsides and on the top of the ridges. There's quite a bit. It was cut back in the late 90s, and they left. It was agreed. Well, when we marked the timber, we did not mark any white oak or shortleaf less than 14 inches in diameter. So it was just taking out the mature stuff is what it was, and it's really done well. Of course, loblolly, as I understand it, will cross-pollinate with shortleaf. It's not the case in all varieties of pine trees, but as I understand it, they will cross-pollinate, and the loblolly that is planted in with or adjacent to shortleaf seems to taken some shortleaf characteristics of small diameter, extremely tall.
Okay.
So I don't know how that's going to work out. It's kind of hard to tell right now, but I've been around pine trees for a long, long time, and I have not seen loblolly grow that high when they're 6 inches in diameter. And I don't know whether that's relevant or not, but that's just my own observation.
Well, and I think it is relevant because every tree farm, especially the ones that I've spoken to, every tree farmer that I've spoken to, there's always something different about their property, and there's always something a little unique and interesting that sometimes they're trying things out on purpose, sometimes things happen accidentally, and you're like, well, we'll see where this goes. And so I think that's part of it. Is a part of being a tree farmer is trying things or seeing how things go that could maybe benefit you in the long run, and maybe that is something you do in the future on purpose instead of accidentally this time around. So I think it's very interesting just hearing kind of some of the things that are happening on folks' property, because I'm sure this every inch of this place forwards and backwards. So you like you said, 3 spots where you could show me some red oaks that are still here on the property, and I just find that very fascinating because it's a lot of property that you guys have around here.
Well, it's of course I'm out there a lot. Yeah. I'm not somebody that sits around the house, and I've got to be out. It's just my personality that I've got to be out doing something, and you mentioned that working plantations south of Interstate 40. I don't want to offend anyone, but that just bores me to tears. And we've got a tree farm just exactly like that in Prairie County. There's not a rock on it anywhere. There's just as flat as it can be. So all you've got to do is just clean it up, rip it, and plant trees, and walk off and leave it. That's, and kind of try to control the sweet gum. That just seems a little too simple to me.
It's too cookie cutter, right? Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Vickers, we're going to take a quick pause right here, actually. We're going to take a quick sponsor pause and hear a little bit more from our sponsors this month, DDK Forestry and Real Estate. DDK proudly supports the AFA. In 1962, Mr. Jerry Davis started DDK with a core value of wanting to help forest landowners. With the professional services DDK provides, they allow landowners to have complete confidence in their portfolio, knowing that their property is managed at the highest level from an expert team with years of experience. Give DDK Forestry and Real Estate a call today and let them help you begin your land legacy. 501-219-8600 or visit them at forestryrealestate.com. Thank you again to DDK Forestry and Real Estate for their continued support of the show. Now, Mr. Vickers, we're kind of getting into the tail half of the episode here, but there are a couple more things I want to talk to you about before we wrap things up. What benefits do you see or do you find that you get, if any, being a member of the Tree Farm program? I mean, is there any benefits that spring to mind?
Well, Doug Jackson signed me up for the American Tree Farm Association, or established my membership and got a number for our farm down in Prairie County when we did that in 1992. Well, for that 30 years, I've received a lot of information that I wouldn't have had a source for if I hadn't been a member of that organization. I was kind of kind of on the fence about the management plan, all the planning that you did, and or they would like for you to do to maintain your certification. But now I've totally changed on that. I think it's worth a whole lot to you to sit down and have to go through the steps of what you're going to do for this period of time, how you're going to control this, having your detailed plans on prescribed burning, on your herbicide use, timber management, when you're going to sell, how you're going to market it, how are you going to pay the taxes on it, or what's required to pay the taxes on it, and that's worth a lot. Now, I would be remiss if I did not say that Mike Mowry, when he was county forester here in Stone County, helped me tremendously. He was always available anytime I needed something, and regardless of whether he thought it was important or not, I mean, he was out here and we were going through whatever the issue was at the time. So being a member of the Arkansas Forestry Association, I'm also a member of the Ozark Woodland Owners Association. I subscribe to a blog called the Family Forest, whether you're familiar with it or not, but it's, they've got up about 600-700 members now, but you get reading the blog, for that in sum total, you kind of get a good perspective of what everybody else in the country is doing too. And a lot of it has to do with wildfire way out west, or longleaf pine in southeast or something like that, or hemlock in Tennessee or somewhere. But that don't interest you, but there's a lot of it that does. So I look for sources of information wherever I can get it.
Well, and that's, stuff like that is what a lot of our folks, tree farmers, foresters, what have you, find value in too, is just being able to talk to other people in the same industry and share ideas, some of it useful, some of it not so useful, but being able to have that communication just to, that might be interesting to try on my property or something, that in and of itself has so much value in it that it's crazy. Do you remember what exactly kind of made you change your mind on like a management plan? Was it just enacting one and seeing how it went, or what exactly changed your mind there?
Well, probably when I started, doing management plan, it was probably 1 or 2 pages. Now it's probably 25 pages. But to start thinking about the characteristics of your property, or you're not the first one here. There's been generation after generation after generation of ownership. These properties out here were homesteaded by the Scots-Irish when they were, in 1830s. Well, that's a long time ago, and they did a lot of work. If you look at some of the rock fences that they built here, and they took a sled and a mule and went out and picked up those rocks, brought them back, built fence out of them, because they had 2 choices back then: a split rail fence or build them out of rock. And on our tour, we'll look at some of those. But how they lived, to try to get their house just as close to a spring as they could, because you could dig a well about 20 feet. It might have a little water in it during the winter and maybe the cooler months, but when it comes summer, it went dry. And and those people suffered through a lot of hardship. But they were here they came here for a reason, and they made the best of it. And as far as I know, from my ancestors, I think they were kind of progressive people, and above all, enjoyed themselves.
So I guess having, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but having kind of a pretty detailed management plan and an idea is just your way of honoring them and the hardships they went through just to even maintain this place.
Right.
And so it's almost like, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I may be speaking out of turn, but it's almost like you are working to make it better in their honor.
Yeah, they cleared these fields with a crosscut saw and a chopping axe. Yeah. And that's hard work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mr. Vickers, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but I kind of am smushing two of my questions together. Can you, why put so much work and effort into this property? You and Martha, your wife Martha, are here in this house right now and living on this property. But why do you guys put so much blood, sweat, and tears into maintaining this property?
Well, heritage, genealogy has something to do with that. My great-great-grandfather, on both sides of the family, immigrated to these mountains in the 1830s. They had been running from authoritarian regimes from out of Scotland to Ireland to, across the North Atlantic to the United States, and it took them about 2 centuries to get here. Or because they started leaving Ireland and Scotland in the 16th century. And they were some of the first immigrants into the Americas. And my father and I used to sit. I was the only one out of his children that cared anything about heritage or where you came from or who were they, or because he had the same same reasoning that I did about I would like to know where I came from and who they were. Well, he knew. Then sometime later, one of my distant cousins, my great-great-grandfathers had a grandmother, gave birth to my great-grandfather and my great-grandmothers on both sides. My grandmother's was one of 13 in a family that homesteaded right here. Foundation to their log cabin is still out there in the yard. The Elliots did the homestead on the adjoining west side of this property, this homestead. And in the 1850s built that house that still stands down there. In fact, there's someone living in it. It's been totally redone, remodeled. But everything was by wagon, by riding a horse, Even when we moved here in 1946, there's really no roads. My father got equipment from the county judge here and built roads himself. But he had, he had experience doing it, but he did it. Well, that's kind of important, to me it is. And, I know other people it's not, but, it is to me. So, like I said, one of my distant cousins she was a genealogist, and she started a study of the McIntyres, the Elliots, and from a time they lived in Ireland or Scotland, moved to Ireland, primarily went to Pennsylvania initially, then down through the Appalachian Mountains, and then, of course, a lot of them went to Texas, a lot of them went, scattered all over. But kind of the diehards came to places like Stone County. And I say diehards, they were really looking for about 4 things. And that was their music. They wanted somewhere where they could have their music. They could hold a dance every Saturday night anywhere they wanted to. They had to have their whiskey. They had to have a little property to do a little subsistence farming. They were not agriculture specialists. I don't think there was necessarily, if they had a milk cow, and a mule, and some way to do a little subsistence farming, they were happy. But the fourth and the most important thing was to just be left the hell alone.
Mm-hmm.
To live a place to where even when I was in high school in Mountain View, when Highway 14, Highway 5, Highway 66, and Highway 9, you get them all out of town, it's a rock road. And there was very little paved road in Stone County at that point in time. And in the 50s, when they wanted to start paving it, there was resistance to that. People didn't want anybody to have access to where they lived, because everybody that came here from somewhere else, after they got here and settled the land, they were from off. And they would, if they lived here 50 years, they would always be from off. They were just not welcomed into the community. And people knew that. I mean, you didn't have to stay here very long. If you were not born and raised here, you knew fairly quickly that you were not welcome. And in fact, Martha heard a little of that when she first started coming here.
They knew she was from off somewhere.
She was from off.
Yeah.
Right. And you still today hear that. But when I was in high school in the 50s, when I was in school in the 50s in Mountain View, it was very prevalent that, and they didn't go anywhere. Yeah. They might go to baseball once, maybe a couple times at 30 miles. I think I probably went to Little Rock about 3 times time I was graduated from high school, but the people just didn't travel. I mean, they were clannish, and but they did keep their music and their whiskey, and law enforcement didn't really bother them very much.
Well, and you still see just knowing Mountain View to some extent, because my family is also from this part of the world, but you still see some of that, the music and the dancing. They're still singing down on the square most weekends. There's festivals. The Bean Festival, I think, is coming up here soon. So you still see a little bit of it.
The Ozark Folk Center,
mm-hmm.
National Park, is here,
mm-hmm.
and it derives strictly from the country music. you know, I can tell you a brief story about what I said earlier, that we went to Maine in the summertime, and one weekend Martha wanted to go up to Camden to the antique stores. So I said, well, I'll go to the bookstore. And we went up there, and I'm going through used books in this used bookstore, and I come across this book that says, Garden Sash was what it was called, and that was the name of the book. And I thought, well, that sounds familiar. So I got the book out, and I'm looking through it, and there's all these old log houses and what have you, and these people that I grew up around that, it looked just like them. So I got over to kind of about the middle of the book, and here's a picture of this guy playing a banjo. Name is Bookbiller Shannon. And I said, I know him. So, but that book was about Stone County, that a woman came here and wrote. And that was the name of the book. And, and she went through the whole, the whole issue of, how welcome people was to come here. But it was, and that's what the book's called, Garden Sash. And, but it's just a conglomeration, a salad of, what you get out of the garden.
Okay. Well, Mr. Vickers, the last kind of big question that I want to ask you here as we're wrapping up, we've talked about your interest in your heritage and kind of the history of the property and your history, but I want to look to the future a little bit. What do you hope to see happen here on this property going into the future?
Well, I don't have total control over that. We do have it in a revocable trust with our two sons as to receive the inheritance from in a revocable trust. And we have two granddaughters and one grandson, and they are included in a trust, but for not the same share that our sons are. But, inevitably it will be up to them.
Okay. And have they talked to you about the property much, or what they would want to do with it?
We briefly have talked about it, but we have a family meeting every Christmas. This year, that discussion is going to be a little longer and a little more in detail. But they do know that if something happened to Martha and I, their first stop would be at our trust attorney. Okay. That would be the first place they go. And, let him guide them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Mr. Vickers, is there anything else that you want to say or you'd like to add before we shut her down?
Well, I appreciate the honor of the Tree Farmer of the Year. It took some effort, but it's satisfying to know that that other people have recognized it, and I appreciate that. We'll keep working on it, and using it as an escape from the Texas heat, but we can't stay here when it's wet, muddy, and cold.
Oh, no. I don't blame you at all for that. I don't like being here when it's wet and muddy and cold anymore. So, well, Mr. Vickers, thank you so much for, again, letting us come and stop by and make a podcast studio out of your kitchen and your dining room. But we appreciate your time and all the work that you guys have done out here and on your property.
I appreciate it very much.
All right. We want to thank you guys, too, for joining us again this month. As always, if you have any questions or if anything you want to know more about the Arkansas Forestry Association, you can visit arcforest.org. That's ARKFORESTS And we want to give a special shout out and thank you to our sponsor one more time this month, DDK Forestry and Real Estate. Thank you to them for their support. And we also want to give another special shout out and thank you to some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. You can find more of his music on Spotify. And as always, we have a link to his website in the description of this episode. Well, make sure you join us next month when we'll have a news topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.